I was standing in my kitchen, the morning light spilling across the countertops, when the world tilted beneath me. My daughter's voice had just told me she was already married. Quiet, distant, final. And the air felt so thin I could barely draw a breath. I remember gripping the edge of the table just to steady myself, wondering how love could turn into a secret this sharp. If you've ever felt someone slip away before you could stop it, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. These stories reach more hearts than you'd think. I didn't know it then, but that single moment would pull me into a truth far darker than betrayal alone. Let me show you how it all began. I never imagined my world would tilt in a single breath. But that is exactly what happened the morning my daughter called and told me she had already married Jason. No warning, no conversation, not even a whisper that a ceremony was coming. Just a blunt announcement that the wedding was over. The celebration had been held without me, and the life I thought I still belonged to had quietly moved on. I remember standing in my kitchen in coastal Maine, the light coming through the window like nothing had changed, while everything inside me felt scraped raw. I kept waiting for the sting to fade, for some explanation to soften the blow, but all I felt was a cold, heavy disbelief settling into my chest. For 66 years, I have weathered my share of losses, but this one felt different. This one came from the person I loved most, and yet, beneath the hurt, something steadier began to rise, a kind of quiet resolve, a sense that what had just happened was not the whole story, not by a long shot, especially knowing that 3 days later, the wedding gift I left at their door sent Jason into a spiral so loud the neighbors heard him. People assume betrayal happens in an instant, but it never truly does. It grows roots long before the moment it blooms. So before I tell you what was inside that gift, I need to take you back to when everything still looked perfect, back to where this really began. There was a time when my life felt simple, anchored by the small rituals Lauren and I had shared for years. She would call me during her lunch breaks on work days, sometimes just to laugh about something she saw on her commute, other times to vent about a project that had her overwhelmed. Those calls were never planned, yet they shaped the rhythm of my days. I always knew I would hear her voice, bright and familiar, carrying pieces of her world to mine. It made our little coastal Maine life feel full, even as she built her own future. Lauren has always been steady and driven, the kind of woman who sets her sights on something and quietly works until she gets there. I loved watching her grow into that strength. So when she told me she had met someone new, a man named Jason, I wanted to be nothing but happy for her, and in those first moments, I genuinely was. He arrived in our lives wrapped in charm. The polished clothes, the easy compliments, the way he seemed almost rehearsed in his kindness. I remember thinking he was trying a little too hard, but I brushed it aside. Lauren looked so hopeful, so certain she had found someone who understood her. I didn't want to cast shadows on something that brought her joy. Still, tiny things unsettled me. The way he spoke about her accomplishments as though they were trophies he got to display, the way he lingered on details about my home and my small beach place, as if those pieces of our life interested him more than our stories did. I felt a flicker of instinct telling me to pay attention, but I pushed it down. Looking back, those early moments were the first quiet tremors of everything that would follow. At the time, though, I told myself I was being overprotective. I didn't yet understand how quickly small shifts can grow into distance, and that distance was about to deepen in ways I couldn't ignore. It happened so slowly at first that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The calls that used to come every afternoon began drifting later into the evening, then skipping days, then disappearing for a week at a time. When I did hear from Lauren, she always sounded rushed, as if someone were monitoring how long she spent with me. I tried not to read into it, telling myself she was just busy, that relationships sometimes shift when new love arrives, but deep down, something in me felt the imbalance beginning. Small traditions that once held us together started slipping. Our Saturday morning check-ins faded. She stopped asking for my help with little things around her condo. And when I suggested stopping by for dinner one evening, she told me their schedule had been unpredictable lately. She said it lightly, but there was a stiffness beneath it, a tone I had never heard from her before. I remember sitting at my kitchen table afterward, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering when it had become so hard just to see my own daughter. The real crack came the morning I opened social media and saw her engagement ring before I ever heard her voice. There it was, a bright picture of her hand, a caption full of excitement, and a flood of congratulations from people who knew before I did. I felt something inside me falter. I waited for a call that didn't come until hours later, and even then, she sounded more defensive than joyful, as though she needed to justify why I wasn't part of the moment. As the months followed, I watched Jason's presence seep into every corner of her life. Decisions were suddenly framed around what he preferred, what he believed was best, what he thought would be healthier for them as a couple. And gradually, the language shifted. My daughter, the woman who once leaned on me without hesitation, began talking as though my closeness was somehow a burden she needed to let go of. Holidays changed next. She told me she and Jason wanted to start their own traditions, leaving me alone in a house that used to be full of laughter. Every part of her life seemed to be drifting beyond my reach, shaped by someone who barely looked me in the eye. By then, the pattern was undeniable. Something was tightening around her, and I could feel the pull as clearly as a tide dragging her away from shore. And soon, one moment would make that truth impossible to ignore. I will never forget the moment Lauren told me she needed distance from me. It came out of her with a strange stiffness, like she was reciting lines someone else had given her. She spoke about wanting space, wanting independence, wanting to redefine her life without old expectations weighing her down. As I listened, all I could think was how foreign her words sounded, how unlike my daughter they truly were. It was as if the woman I had raised had been pushed behind a curtain, replaced by someone rehearsed and cautious. The deepest cut came when she mentioned the lake cabin. That little place had been ours for decades, a quiet refuge where she learned to swim, where we spent long weekends unplugged from the world. Hearing her say it no longer mattered to her, that it represented a part of her life she needed to move past, left me breathless. It felt like watching a treasured memory evaporate right in front of me. Then came the holidays. She explained that she and Jason wanted to do their own thing this year, as though the traditions we built over a lifetime meant nothing more than optional background noise. I listened, stunned, as she talked about creating new memories without me, and I felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. The more she spoke, the clearer it became that Jason's influence had seeped into every corner of her thinking. For a moment, all I felt was heartbreak. But beneath that pain, something shifted. A clarity I had been resisting finally settled in. My daughter wasn't pulling away by choice. She was being pushed, shaped, redirected, and that was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Something was deeply wrong, and I needed to understand exactly what Jason had pulled her into. So I decided to start digging. I remember sitting alone in my living room the night I finally admitted to myself that something was terribly wrong. The house was quiet in that heavy way it gets when the truth is trying to surface, and I felt a calm settle over me, one that comes only when you stop arguing with your instincts. I had spent months second-guessing my worries, trying to believe Lauren was simply growing into a new phase of life. But after hearing her speak like a stranger, I knew I couldn't hide behind hope anymore. I had to understand who Jason really was. I started small. Online searches, casual browsing, looking for anything that might explain the shift I'd seen in my daughter. At first, nothing stood out. Just the polished image he had always shown us. But then, little things began aligning in ways I couldn't ignore. Mentions of past relationships that ended abruptly, always with women who happened to be well-established financially. Comments on old posts from people hinting at patterns of control. Nothing blatant, but enough to stir unease deep in my chest. As I kept digging, I found something that made the air around me feel colder. One of the women Jason had dated lived only a few towns over, and she had once been involved in legal disputes over missing funds tied to her business. The timeline overlapped perfectly with the end of their relationship. It was the first moment I realized this went far beyond emotional manipulation. Then came the twist I never saw coming. Buried in an old financial record was a familiar last name, his grandfather's, linked to a dispute involving my late husband decades ago. It was tied to stolen money, a case that had quietly faded after my husband passed. Suddenly, the threads pulled tight. Jason had stepped into my daughter's life with far more motive than affection. The shock of that discovery left me sitting in silence, feeling the weight of a truth that could tear everything open. And yet, beneath that shock, resolve took shape. I now held information powerful enough to shift the entire balance. And with that knowledge, I knew exactly what my next step had to be. When Lauren told me she had already married Jason, the words landed like a stone dropped into deep water, silent at first, then rippling through every part of me. I felt the shock rise, sharp and cold, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. I knew any sign of emotion would be twisted, used against me, fed back to her as proof that I was clinging too tightly. So I stayed calm, even as something inside my chest quietly splintered. But beneath that heartbreak, a different feeling surfaced. Clarity, the kind that settles in when you know the time for hesitation has passed. I had spent weeks pulling threads, uncovering the truth piece by piece, and now I understood why I had found it. This moment, the secret wedding, the severed bond, was exactly what Jason had been steering her toward. So, I decided to give them a wedding gift. Not the sentimental kind a mother dreams of offering her daughter, but a small box lined with truth. I gathered the documents I had collected, the records of his past relationships, the financial disputes, the connection between his grandfather and my late husband. Each page represented a step he thought he had hidden, a shadow he believed would never catch up to him. I placed them carefully in the box, closed it, wrapped it with a simple ribbon, and drove it to their townhouse. I left it on the doorstep without knocking. I was back in my car when I heard him. A furious, breaking sound carried through the open window, a shout, a crash. the unmistakable panic of a man realizing his secrets were no longer buried. I sat there, hands resting gently on the wheel, feeling an unexpected calm wash over me. Not joy, not triumph, just the steady knowledge that the first blow had landed. And with that, everything began shifting toward consequences far larger than either of them expected. Lauren showed up at my door the next morning, shaken in a way I had never seen before. Her eyes were swollen, her voice unsteady, and she carried the torn remains of the box I had left for them. In that moment, all the distance between us fell away. She sank into my arms, trembling as the truth finally settled over her. She told me how Jason had unraveled the night before, how his anger had spilled into every corner of their home, how fear had finally eclipsed the illusion she had been trying to hold together. As she spoke, she revealed something I hadn't expected. She had found even more evidence hidden in his office files, documents that matched the patterns I had already uncovered. Financial schemes, false identities, trails of debt and manipulation that stretched farther than either of us imagined. It was no longer a question of heartbreak. It was a matter of safety. We met with my estate attorney that same afternoon, and within hours, investigators were involved. To my shock, they already knew Jason's name. He had been on their radar for months, tied to cases eerily similar to what Lauren had walked into. Hearing that confirmed everything. This was bigger than our family. This was a man moving from one life to the next, leaving destruction behind. The investigators laid out a plan, a monitored conversation, carefully guided, meant to capture Jason's intentions in his own words. Lauren agreed, steadying herself with a resolve I had not seen in her since before he entered her life. Standing beside her, I felt the shift. We were no longer victims of his manipulation. We were witnesses preparing for justice. And the next step would unfold in court. The courtroom felt heavier than any room I had ever stepped into, as though every quiet breath carried the weight of what Jason had done. I sat beside Lauren, watching her steady herself before taking the stand. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength I had been afraid she lost. She laid out the truth of their life together with a clarity that cut through the silence, and I felt an ache of both pride and sorrow rise in my chest. One by one, the other women came forward. Their stories echoed the same patterns: control, financial manipulation, isolation. Hearing them was like listening to distant versions of what could have happened to my daughter if she had stayed. Then the final blow arrived when his accomplice detailed the schemes, the hidden accounts, and the plan Jason had crafted for years. It was impossible to deny the web he had spun. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. Their verdict landed like a long-awaited exhale. Guilty on every count. The sentencing followed, each year added to his sentence, tightening the door behind him. As the gavel fell, I felt something inside me settle. Not joy, something quieter, steadier. The battle was nearly over, and now it was time for my daughter and me to begin healing. When the courtroom doors finally closed behind us, it felt as though a long-held breath had left my body. The weight of the past year eased, not suddenly, but in gentle waves. Lauren walked beside me, quieter than usual. But there was a steadiness in her step I hadn't seen since before Jason entered her life. It was the first sign that she was finding her way back to herself. Our healing didn't arrive in grand gestures. It came in the small, steady moments: morning coffee at my kitchen table, long drives along the coast, quiet evenings where she sat on the couch wrapped in the old blanket she loved as a child. Each moment stitched us back together in ways neither of us needed to explain. I spent a lot of time reflecting on forgiveness, not as an act of excusing what happened, but as a way of clearing space for us to move forward. I watched Lauren rebuild her routines, reclaim her confidence, and slowly reimagine the future she almost lost. We even returned to the lake cabin, letting the silence of the water remind us of who we were before everything fractured. Now, as I look at her rebuilding her life with intention and strength, I feel a peace settle over me. Our relationship survived something that tried to break it entirely, and with that sense of renewal, it feels right to share a final thought with you. This journey taught me how fragile our closest bonds can feel, yet how strong they truly are when tested. I learned to trust my instincts, to protect what matters, and to believe that healing is possible even after deep harm. Watching my daughter reclaim her life reminded me that resilience grows quietly, one honest step at a time. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll share your own experiences. Your voice matters more than you know. If you found something meaningful here, I'd be grateful if you liked, shared, and joined the conversation. I read every comment, and your stories stay with me.